I only drove to my ex-girlfriend's door to return her clothes and finally let go. But her mother opened the door with red eyes and whispered, "I missed you very much." What I didn't know, behind that door was a missing sister, a secret poker club, and a truth my ex-girlfriend had been hiding just to protect me. And I was already too far in to walk away. The rain had been falling since I crossed the state line. Not a light drizzle either. The kind of heavy, relentless rain that makes everything outside the windshield look like a watercolor painting left in the sink. My wipers were working overtime and still losing the battle. I had 2 black trash bags sitting in my back seat. Chloe's clothes. 3 years of a relationship reduced to whatever fit inside 2 garbage bags from a dollar store. There was something almost insulting about that, but I hadn't been the one to pack them. She had. 2 days after she ended things, she texted me a single message. "You can drop my stuff off whenever. No rush. No rush." Like I was a delivery driver. Like 3 years meant no rush. I waited almost 3 weeks before I actually drove over. I told myself I was busy. Work, the apartment, life. But honestly, I just wasn't ready to stand outside that building and accept that it was really over. I kept replaying our last real conversation in my head the whole drive down. Not the breakup itself. That had been quiet. Almost too quiet, like she had rehearsed it. What kept replaying was a moment from 2 months before that. We were eating takeout on her couch, and she got a phone call. She stepped into the hallway, and when she came back she looked different. Tighter somehow, like she had pulled a wall up behind her eyes. I asked her if everything was okay. She smiled and said yes. She lied. I know that now. I parked outside her building on Winthrop Avenue just after 7 in the evening. The rain was still coming down hard. I sat in the car for a moment longer than I needed to, watching the water run down the passenger window in thin rivers. Then I grabbed both bags, pulled my jacket over my head like that was somehow going to help, and jogged to the entrance. I buzzed the apartment. No answer the first time. I buzzed again. The intercom clicked. "Who is it?" It was Linda, Chloe's mother. Her voice sounded off even through the static of the old intercom speaker, rough around the edges, like she hadn't slept in a while. "It's Ethan, Mrs. Bennett. I have Chloe's things." A long pause. Then the door buzzed open. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hallway with a bag in each hand, water dripping off my jacket onto the carpet. When I reached apartment 4C, the door opened before I even knocked. Linda Bennett was standing in the doorway, and the moment I saw her face, I forgot everything I had planned to say. Her eyes were red. Not the kind of red from allergies or bad sleep. The kind that comes after hours of crying. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she was still in her daytime clothes at 7 in the evening, which was unusual for her. Linda was always put together. Always. Even on casual days, she carried herself like the apartment had a dress code. Tonight, she looked like someone who had stopped caring about any of that. She looked at me for just a second and then stepped forward and hugged me. Not a polite, brief hug. She held on, both arms around me. Her face turned slightly into my shoulder, the way you hold someone when you actually need them to be there. I stood frozen for a moment, bag still in my hands, completely caught off guard. Then she whispered, barely above the sound of the rain coming through the hallway window at the end of the hall. "Ethan, I missed you very much." I didn't know what to say to that. I set the bags down gently and hugged her back. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes quickly like she was embarrassed, then stepped aside to let me in. I picked the bags back up and walked inside. The apartment felt different. I couldn't explain it immediately, but something in the air was wrong. Too quiet, too still. Usually when I had come over in the past, there was noise. The television, Linda humming in the kitchen, Chloe's younger sister Emma playing music from her room down the hall. Tonight there was none of that. And then I realized. Chloe wasn't here. I glanced toward her bedroom door. Closed. I looked toward Emma's room. Also closed. I set the bags down near the entrance and turned toward Linda, who was standing in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed over herself, like she was holding something in. "Mrs. Bennett," I said carefully. "Is everything all right?" She shook her head slowly. "Emma is missing," she said. "She hasn't come home in 2 nights." The words landed like something cold dropped into my chest. "The police say she probably ran away after an argument," Linda's voice tightened. "But I know my daughter. She didn't run away." I stood there in my wet jacket, in the apartment of my ex-girlfriend's mother, and understood in that moment that returning Chloe's clothes was no longer the reason I was here. Something was very wrong in this family. And somehow, without planning it, without wanting it, I had just walked right into the middle of it. I didn't leave that night. Linda made tea neither of us really wanted, and we sat at the kitchen table while she told me everything she knew, which wasn't much. Emma had been home last Thursday evening. They had argued. Nothing serious, just one of those tired end-of-day arguments about Emma coming home late and not answering her phone. Linda had gone to bed frustrated. When she woke up Friday morning, Emma's room was empty and her bed hadn't been slept in. At first, Linda assumed Emma had gone to a friend's place to cool off. It had happened before. Emma was 19, stubborn, and independent in the way that sometimes looked like recklessness. But by Friday evening, there was still no word. By Saturday morning, Linda had called every friend she could reach. Nobody had seen her. She filed a missing persons report Saturday afternoon. The responding officer had been polite, but not particularly concerned. Emma was 19, legally an adult, and had left after a family argument. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle, nothing that suggested anything other than a young woman who needed space. They would keep the report on file. They would follow up. Linda had been waiting by the phone ever since. "And Chloe?" I asked. Linda wrapped both hands around her mug. "She left yesterday morning. Said she had something to handle and would be back in a few days. Wouldn't tell me where." "Did she know about Emma before she left?" "Yes." Linda's jaw tightened slightly. "That's what I don't understand. Emma goes missing and 2 days later Chloe disappears without a proper explanation. She wasn't panicked when she left. She was calm. Too calm." She looked up at me. "That scared me more than anything. I stayed another hour, mostly just listening, mostly just being another person in the apartment, so Linda wasn't sitting alone in the silence. Before I left, I told her to call me if she heard anything." She nodded and squeezed my hand at the door like she was afraid I might not come back if she let go too quickly. The roads were still flooded in patches on my way out of the city. A highway alert on my phone suggested avoiding 2 major routes back toward my side of town. I ended up pulling into a small motel off the main road near Oak Park just before 10. It was the kind of place with exterior hallway doors and a vending machine that hummed too loudly at night. But the room was clean and dry, and that was enough. I brought the 2 trash bags inside because leaving them in the car felt wrong after everything Linda had just told me. I set them on the floor near the small luggage rack and sat on the edge of the bed staring at them for a while. Then I started going through them. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed something to do with my hands. Maybe sitting still in that quiet room with all of that new information pressing against the inside of my skull was something I wasn't ready to do yet. So I unzipped the first bag and started pulling things out. Folded sweaters, a couple of dresses, a scarf I remembered she wore on our first real date, 2 pairs of jeans, a hoodie with a university logo that I was pretty sure was actually mine originally. I set everything aside carefully. Not because I was sentimental about it right now, but because it felt wrong to treat her things carelessly tonight of all nights. The second bag had more. A coat, several blouses, a light cardigan, and near the bottom, a faded denim jacket I recognized immediately. She had worn it constantly the first year we were together. Dark wash, slightly oversized, the kind of jacket that looks better the older it gets. I pulled it out and held it for a moment. Then I noticed something. Along the inner lining near the bottom hem, the fabric wasn't lying flat the way it should. There was a slight stiffness to it, a raised section no bigger than an envelope, subtle enough that you'd never notice unless you were holding it in your hands with nothing else to focus on. I ran my fingers along the lining seam and felt the edge of something taped beneath the fabric. I turned the jacket over and found a small section near the interior hem where the stitching had been carefully undone and resewn by hand. Not perfectly, but close enough that a quick glance would miss it entirely. I pulled the stitching loose carefully and reached inside. A folded piece of paper, and attached to it with a strip of tape, a small key. I unfolded the note slowly. The handwriting was rushed but deliberate. Someone who wrote fast because they were scared but pressed hard on the pen because they needed to make sure every word was readable. "If something happens to me, check the storage unit." That was all. No name at the bottom. No date. No explanation. But I knew the handwriting. I had seen it on birthday cards left on the kitchen counter, on sticky notes attached to the fridge at Chloe's apartment. I had seen it on a thank you note slipped under my door after I helped move furniture one afternoon. It was Emma's handwriting. I sat on the edge of the motel bed holding that note and that key and felt something shift inside me. This was no longer a teenager who had stormed off after a family argument. Emma had hidden this note inside Chloe's jacket deliberately. She had planned for the possibility that something might go wrong. She had wanted someone to find it. She had wanted someone to look. I tried calling Chloe. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I sent a text telling her I had found something important in her jacket and to call me as soon as possible. The message showed delivered, but no response came. I set the phone down on the nightstand and stared at the key. It was small and flat with a number stamped into the metal, the kind used for padlocks on storage units. I turned it over in my fingers slowly. Then Linda called. She hadn't been able to sleep either. Her voice was quieter on the phone than it had been at the apartment, more uncertain. She apologized for calling so late. I told her not to worry about it. Then she said something that reframed the entire evening. Ethan, there's something I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't know how. For the past several months, Chloe has been acting differently. Nervous. Distracted. About 6 months ago, she started working part-time at a private event venue. I didn't ask too many questions because she said it was good money. Linda paused. But I heard things. From Emma. The venue wasn't just a venue. There were poker events. Private ones. Expensive ones. And the people running them weren't the kind of people you walk away from easily. The quiet in the motel room felt heavier after she said that. I think Emma found out something she wasn't supposed to find out, Linda said softly. I looked at the key still sitting in my palm. I think you might be right, I said. I didn't sleep much that night. I was on the road by 7 the next morning. The rain from the night before had cleared out and left everything looking washed and gray. The kind of morning where the sky can't decide if it wants to be overcast or just give up entirely and let the sun through. I drove with the key sitting in the cup holder between the seats, glancing at it every few minutes like it might disappear if I stopped paying attention. The number stamped into the metal was 114. Below the number, in faint letters that were nearly worn smooth, were the initials C, S, F. I typed it into my phone at a red light and found it on the second search. Cicero Storage Facility. An address on South Laramie Avenue, about 20 minutes southwest of where I had stayed the night. I had never been to Cicero. I had driven through it a handful of times on the way to other places, but never stopped. It was one of those towns that existed in the practical geography of Chicago's surrounding areas without ever demanding your attention. Industrial in some stretches, residential in others. The kind of place where storage facilities and auto shops and small family restaurants all shared the same unremarkable blocks. The facility itself was exactly what the name promised. A long rectangular lot surrounded by a chain-link fence with a keypad gate at the entrance. Rows of gray metal units lined up in 2 parallel corridors with a narrow lane running between them. A small office building sat near the front with a window unit air conditioner that was already humming even in the cool morning air. I parked outside and sat for a moment. I thought about calling Linda first. Then I thought about trying Chloe again. But Linda didn't know about the key yet, and I wasn't ready to worry her further until I knew what was inside. And Chloe still hadn't responded to my messages from the night before. Whatever she was dealing with in Milwaukee was keeping her off the grid completely. So I got out of the car and walked through the pedestrian entrance beside the gate. Unit 114 was in the second corridor, near the far end. The padlock was a heavy combination of metal and age, the kind that looked like it had been locked for a while. But the key turned smoothly, like it had been used recently. The lock opened. I crouched down and lifted the rolling door. It groaned as it went up, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the corridor. I stood and looked inside. My first thought was that I had the wrong unit, because what I was looking at didn't fit with anything I knew about Emma Bennett. She was a college student, 19 years old, quiet in the way that smart people sometimes are, the kind of quiet that meant she was always paying closer attention than anyone realized. What I was looking at was not the storage unit of a 19-year-old girl hiding her extra clothes and old textbooks. Along the left wall, stacked in 2 neat columns, were black binders, at least a dozen of them, each one labeled on the spine with a date range going back almost 8 months. On the right side of the unit, there was a folding card table with several folders spread across it. One of them was open and inside were photographs, printed on regular paper, slightly grainy, but clear enough. Men in suits entering and exiting a building I didn't recognize. Time-stamped at the bottom corner of each one. Some photos had names written in the margin in Emma's handwriting. Others had question marks. I picked up one of the binders and opened it. Poker ledgers. Detailed ones. Names, dates, amounts. Some of the amounts written down made me pause. These weren't Friday night card game numbers. These were figures that belonged in business accounts, not on handwritten ledger pages. I set it down and picked up a second binder. Receipts. Dozens of them. Cash transactions. All large. All connected to what looked like a handful of different businesses. A catering company. A private car service. A commercial cleaning operation. The businesses sounded legitimate on paper, but the transaction patterns were not. The same amounts cycling through different company names on overlapping dates. I wasn't a financial investigator, but even I could see the structure of it. Money going in under one name and surfacing under another. I moved to the card table and went through the folders more carefully. The third folder stopped me completely. Inside was a shoebox. I lifted the lid. Burner phones. 4 of them. All powered off. Beneath the phones, a small notebook with a rubber band around it. I slid the rubber band off and opened it. Emma had been tracking locations and dates going back almost 5 months. Addresses scattered across Illinois and into Wisconsin. Times of day, vehicle descriptions, names or partial names written in abbreviated shorthand that I could only half decode. But the pattern was obvious even without understanding every detail. She had been building something. Piece by piece, page by page, she had been quietly assembling a picture of whatever operation Chloe had gotten tangled up in. This was not the work of a teenager who stumbled onto something by accident. Emma had gone looking deliberately, and someone had eventually noticed. I stood in the middle of that storage unit with the notebook in my hands and felt the full weight of it settle over me. Emma wasn't some bystander who got caught in the wrong situation. She had made herself part of it on purpose. She had decided to document everything she could find and then store it somewhere safe and hidden. She had even hidden a note inside her sister's jacket as a contingency. She had planned for the possibility that she wouldn't be able to use any of this herself. That thought made my chest tight in a way I didn't want to examine too carefully. I started photographing everything with my phone. The binder pages, the receipts, the location notebook, the photographs on the card table. I worked quickly and methodically, moving through each item without stopping to process any of it. There would be time to go through it properly later. Right now, I just needed a copy of everything in case something happened to the unit itself. I was photographing the last page of the location notebook when I felt it. That specific, uncomfortable awareness of being watched. I lowered my phone and turned slowly toward the open unit door. The corridor between the storage rows was empty. But at the far end, just past the last unit before the fence line, a black SUV was parked along the outer road. Engine running. Dark tinted windows. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I was certain of that because I had walked the full length of the corridor and I would have noticed it. I looked directly at it. For about 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then the SUV pulled forward slowly, turned at the end of the road, and drove away without any apparent hurry. Deliberate. Unhurried. Like it wanted me to know it had been there. I locked the unit, pocketed the key, and walked back to my car faster than I intended. My phone buzzed just as I reached the driver's door. I grabbed it quickly. A text from Chloe. Stop looking into this. Please. I mean it, Ethan. Stop. I stared at the message. Then I got in the car and started driving. I read Chloe's message 3 more times sitting in that parking lot. Stop looking into this. Please. I mean it, Ethan. Stop. No explanation. No context. Just a command wrapped inside a plea, the kind of message that tells you more by what it leaves out than by what it actually says. She knew I had found something. Either she had seen my text from the night before or someone had told her I had shown up at her mother's apartment. Either way, the fact that she reached out at all meant she was more rattled than she wanted to admit. I texted back immediately. I found Emma's note. In the storage unit. We need to talk. The message sat on delivered for almost 10 minutes. Then 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, I'm in Milwaukee. Don't come here. I put the phone in my pocket, pulled out of the Cicero storage facility, and started driving north toward Milwaukee. I know how that sounds. She told me not to come, and I went anyway. But here is the thing about knowing someone for 3 years. You learn the difference between what they say and what they mean. Chloe telling me not to come while also telling me exactly where she was. That wasn't an accident. That was someone who wanted to be found, but couldn't bring themselves to ask for it directly. Or maybe I just needed to believe that to justify the drive. Either way, I was already merging onto I-94 North before I finished the thought. Milwaukee was about 90 minutes from Chicago on a clear morning. I made it in just under 80, which tells you everything about my state of mind during that drive. I had the photographs I'd taken at the storage unit open on my phone at every red light, trying to cross-reference names from Emma's location notebook against the business names on the receipts. Most of it was still unclear, but a few things were starting to form a loose shape. The catering company kept appearing across multiple ledger pages. Same name, different dates, always connected to large round number transactions. 50,000, 80,000, once 120. Companies doing legitimate work don't deal in that many round numbers. Round numbers in cash are the accounting language of people who don't want a paper trail connecting the real source to the real destination. Emma had understood that. She had flagged those transactions specifically in her notebook with small asterisks in the margin. She was sharper than anyone had given her credit for. Chloe had said she was near the riverfront. I found a diner on East Clybourne Street that sat close enough to the Milwaukee River that you could see the water from the window tables. Something told me that was where she meant. She had always liked water. Said it made her feel like things were still moving even when everything else felt stuck. She was already there when I walked in. Sitting at a corner table near the window, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes on the door like she had been watching it since she arrived. When she saw me, she didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been bracing for an impact and had finally stopped waiting for it to arrive. I sat down across from her. She looked tired. Not the surface tired that comes from a bad night of sleep. The deep kind, the kind that lives behind the eyes and has been building for months. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, which meant she had packed in a hurry and grabbed whatever was available. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, "I told you not to come." "I know," I said. She shook her head slowly but didn't argue further. She already knew why I was here. I put my phone on the table with one of the ledger photographs on the screen. She looked at it, and something in her expression shifted. Not surprise. More like resignation. Like a door she had been holding shut for a long time had finally been pushed open from the other side. "How much did you find?" she asked. Enough to know Emma wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Chloe wrapped her hands tighter around the mug and looked out at the river for a long moment. Then she started talking. Her father had died 4 years ago. A heart attack, sudden and early, the kind that doesn't give anyone time to prepare. What it left behind wasn't just grief. It was debt. Private gambling debts, the kind that don't get filed in court or settled through lawyers. The kind that get collected by people who show up at your door on a Tuesday evening and speak very quietly and very clearly about timelines. Linda hadn't known the full extent of it. Chloe had shielded her from most of it after the funeral, handling the conversations, the negotiations, the arrangements. She was 22 at the time, and she had handled it the way a person handles something overwhelming, by just putting her head down and pushing through without stopping to ask whether she should. Part of the arrangement involved working private poker events organized by the same group her father had owed money to. Not as a player, as staff, checking coats, managing the room, occasionally working the bar. Invisible work that kept her in proximity to people who expected her family to remain cooperative and quiet. She had done it for almost 2 years before she met me. She never told me because she had convinced herself it was almost over. Then it wasn't almost over. Then Emma found the ledgers. Emma got into my laptop. Chloe said quietly, "I don't even know when." But she found files I had kept from the early days, contact lists, transaction records I had photographed just to protect myself in case things ever went bad. Emma took those files, and then she started digging further on her own. "And someone found out she was digging," I said. One of the accountants for the operation noticed files had been accessed remotely from an unfamiliar device. It didn't take them long to work backward. Chloe's voice tightened. Emma panicked and ran before they could confront her. "Why didn't you just tell me any of this?" She looked at me directly, then for the first time since I sat down. Her eyes were steady, but there was something fragile just underneath the surface of that steadiness. "Because you would have done exactly what you're doing right now," she said simply. I didn't have a response to that because she wasn't wrong. Before I could say anything else, I watched her eyes move to something behind me. Her expression shifted instantly. The color drained from her face in the space of a single breath. I started to turn around. "Don't," she said sharply, low and controlled. She stood up, grabbed her jacket, and leaned toward me. "There is someone outside that window," she said. "Don't turn around. Don't follow me." Then she walked calmly toward the back of the diner and disappeared through the kitchen exit. I sat alone at the table with her half-finished coffee still steaming in front of me and a river moving quietly outside the window. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a very clear thought formed. This was nowhere close to over. I gave it 2 full minutes before I turned around. The window beside our table looked out onto a narrow street running parallel to the river. There were a few parked cars, a cyclist cutting through, a man in a gray coat walking a dog in the opposite direction. Nobody standing still. Nobody watching. Whoever Chloe had spotted was already gone, or had been careful enough to move before I looked. I left enough cash on the table to cover both coffees and walked out the front door. I tried calling her twice on the way to my car. Both times it rang through without going to voicemail, which meant she was declining the calls manually. She was alive and moving and choosing not to talk to me. Under the circumstances, I decided to accept that as the best available outcome. I sat in the parking lot for a while, engine idling, thinking through everything she had told me. Chloe hadn't run from the situation. She had been embedded in it long before the situation became dangerous. And Emma, instead of going to anyone for help, had decided to build a case entirely on her own. 2 sisters, both trying to protect the same family, both moving in opposite directions without telling each other what they were doing. The result was that Emma was somewhere out there alone and scared with copied financial records that at least one group of very motivated people wanted returned. I needed to find her before they did. I was back in Chicago by early afternoon. I went straight to Linda's apartment. She answered the door looking like she had been awake since before dawn, which she probably had. I told her most of what I knew. Not everything. I left out the specific details about Chloe's involvement with the poker operation because that was a conversation Chloe needed to have with her own mother on her own terms. But I told her about the storage unit, about the ledgers and the photographs, about Emma tracking the operation for months. Linda sat very still through all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I always knew Emma was too observant for her own good. Since she was small, she noticed everything. She never let anything go. That's probably what got her into this," I said. "But it's also probably what's kept her safe so far." Linda nodded slowly. Then she stood up and walked to the kitchen counter where her phone was charging. She unplugged it and brought it to the table. "There's something I need to show you," she said. "I found it this morning and I didn't know what to do with it." She pulled up a social media profile on her phone and handed it to me. It was an account I didn't recognize at first. A pseudonym, a username that looked like a random string of letters, no profile photo. But the account had been active recently. Linda had found it by searching through a list of accounts Emma had followed on her main profile, going through each one methodically in the middle of the night the way a desperate mother does when she has run out of other options. "Look at the last login," Linda said. The account had been accessed earlier that morning, and the location data attached to a single saved post pointed to an area north of the city, somewhere in the general region of Lake Geneva in southern Wisconsin. "That's Emma," Linda said. "She's still using this account. She thinks nobody knows about it." I was already reaching for my jacket. The drive north took me through some of the prettiest stretches of highway in the region, not that I was paying much attention. I had Emma's notebook photographs pulled up on my passenger seat, cross-referencing the addresses she had logged in the Lake Geneva area against what Linda had shown me. One address appeared twice in the notebook with a small asterisk beside it both times. A rural road number outside a small town called Fontaine-en-Geneva Lake. Emma had written a name next to it that I had partially decoded earlier. A first name only. Marcus. I found the road without too much difficulty. It ran along the western edge of the lake through a stretch of older properties, seasonal rental homes mostly, the kind that families used in summers and left quiet through the rest of the year. The address from Emma's notebook corresponded to a lakeside property set back from the road behind a short gravel driveway. I parked a short distance down the road and walked back. The house looked empty at first glance. Curtains drawn, no vehicles in the driveway. a porch that had accumulated enough leaf debris to suggest nobody had swept it recently. The kind of stillness that either means genuinely empty or very deliberately quiet. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Nothing. I walked around to the side of the house. A wooden deck overlooking the lake. Patio furniture that had been left out past the season it was meant for. I checked the back door out of instinct. Locked. I was about to walk back to the road when I noticed the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Old metal, slightly rusted, the kind that you stop checking regularly when nobody is expected to send you anything. I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded grocery receipt. Still crisp. I turned it over. The timestamp at the top read yesterday's date. A small store in Fontana. A few basic items. The kind of purchase someone makes when they are trying to stay fed without drawing attention to themselves. Emma had been here. Recently. There was a small cafe about half a mile back down the main road toward town. I went in and ordered coffee I didn't need just to have a reason to be there and ask questions without seeming like I was asking questions. The woman behind the counter was middle-aged, the kind of person who notices everything in a small town because small towns don't give you much else to do. I described Emma as casually as I could. Young woman, dark hair, probably looked tired, possibly nervous. The woman's expression shifted before I even finished the description. Yeah, she was in here yesterday afternoon, she said. Sat by herself for about an hour. Kept looking out the window toward the parking lot. Did she say anything? Asked me twice if I had seen a silver SUV parked outside. The woman glanced toward the window instinctively. I thought it was a strange thing to ask. Asked her if something was wrong. She just smiled and said she was fine. A pause. She didn't look fine. Emma was alive. Moving, alert, and scared enough to be watching for a specific vehicle everywhere she went. The silver SUV. Not the black one I had seen outside the storage facility. A different vehicle. Which meant there was more than one set of people paying attention to this situation. That detail sat uneasily in my chest the whole drive back south. I called Linda as I merged back onto the highway. She was there. I told her. She's moving around, but she's okay. Linda exhaled on the other end of the line. A long, unsteady breath that carried 3 days of held tension inside it. Find her, Ethan, she said quietly. I will, I said. And for the first time since I had walked into that apartment carrying 2 trash bags in the rain, I actually believed it. I got back to Chicago just as the evening was settling in. The city looked different at dusk after a day like that. The lights coming on across the skyline, the traffic thinning out on the expressway, everything moving toward the quiet end of the day while my mind was running in the opposite direction. I stopped at a gas station on the south side, filled the tank, bought a sandwich I ate in 3 distracted bites, and sat in the parking lot going through the photographs on my phone again. I was trying to find the name Marcus. Emma had written it beside the Lake Geneva address twice, which meant it wasn't a casual connection. It was someone she had specifically tracked to that location. I went back through the ledger photographs and found it on the 3rd pass, buried in the middle of a page from 6 months ago. Marcus Hale, listed as a coordinator across several of the poker events. Not an organizer, not a financier. A coordinator, which in the language of that kind of operation usually meant the person who made sure the logistics worked smoothly and the right people were in the right rooms. A coordinator would know exactly which records existed and exactly how damaging they could be. I wrote the name down in the Notes app on my phone and kept it there. Chloe called me at 8:30. No greeting, no preamble. Just her voice, lower than usual, like she was somewhere she didn't want to be overheard. Are you still in the city? Just got back, I said. Don't go to my mother's apartment tonight. And don't go back to wherever you've been staying. A pause. Are you somewhere different from last night? Yes. Why? Because the people looking for Emma aren't just watching her. They're watching anyone connected to her. Another pause, longer this time. I think they know you've been asking around. The storage unit. The cafe in Fontana. I had been careful, but not invisible. Anyone watching Emma's trail would have eventually found the same footprints I had. Chloe, I said carefully. Where are you right now? Heading back toward Illinois. I handled the debt situation. Or most of it. She sounded exhausted in a way that went beyond tired. There's more I need to tell you, but not on the phone. Can you meet me tonight? Where? She gave me an address outside Kenosha. A road I didn't know, somewhere between the Wisconsin border and the northern edge of Illinois. She said to look for a building set back from the road with a faded sign out front. Then she hung up before I could ask anything further. I found the place just before 10. The sign was barely readable from the road. The painted letters faded to almost nothing by years of weather. What remained was enough to make out the shape of the words. An arcade, from the look of the building itself. A squat rectangular structure with boarded windows and a parking lot that had been reclaimed in patches by weeds pushing through the cracked asphalt. The kind of place that had probably been full of noise and color at some point in the 90s and had been quietly dying ever since. Chloe's car was parked at the far end of the lot with the lights off. I pulled up beside her and got out. She was leaning against the hood of her car with her arms folded, looking up at the sky like she was trying to find something in it. When I walked over, she straightened up and looked at me directly in that way she had, steady on the surface, everything underneath working hard to stay that way. We stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then I said, "You could have told me. Any of it. At any point in the last 2 years." "I know," she said. "I would have helped you." "I know that too." She unfolded her arms and pressed her hands into her jacket pockets. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one, and standing in a dark parking lot outside an abandoned building was not the time to pull it apart. We had more pressing things to deal with. "Tell me the rest," I said. She took a breath and then told me. Emma hadn't just copied financial records from Chloe's laptop. She had gone further on her own. Several weeks before she disappeared, she had managed to access a secondary set of documents through one of the burner phones she had obtained. Digital records from inside the operation itself, transaction logs, communication threads, internal accounting that documented the full scope of what was being laundered and through which businesses. The records were far more detailed than anything in the storage unit. Emma had those records stored somewhere separate, somewhere only she knew about, and someone inside the operation knew she had them. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because the man who called me about the dead in Milwaukee told me." Chloe paused. "He's not one of the people running the operation. He's one of the people financing it. Or was. He told me the organization is falling apart internally. 2 of the main organizers have been at each other for months over money. The whole thing is starting to crack from the inside, and Emma is caught in the middle of that collapse. The people chasing her aren't trying to hurt her," Chloe said. "They want the records back before everything falls apart publicly. If those documents surface through the wrong channels, it doesn't just end the operation. It ends several people financially in a very permanent way." That distinction, that Emma was being chased rather than hunted, was the first genuinely reassuring thing I had heard in 4 days. It didn't make her safe, but it changed the nature of the danger she was in. I was about to respond when I heard something. A soft sound from inside the building behind us. We both went still at exactly the same moment. Then Chloe reached slowly into her backpack and pulled out a small object I recognized after a second. One of the burner phones from the storage unit. She had taken it before I had the chance to ask how it had ended up in her possession. The screen was lit. The phone had powered on by itself, or rather it had received a signal after days of being dormant. A single text message on the screen from a number saved only as a string of zeros. "Don't go home." We both stared at it. Then a second message arrived beneath the first. An address. I read it twice to make sure I had it right. A road outside Rockford. A specific building number with a note attached in the same plain, unformatted text. Lane 7. Back maintenance door. Knock 3 times. Chloe looked up from the phone and met my eyes. "Emma," she said quietly. Not a question. "Emma," I confirmed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The parking lot was completely silent around us, except for the distant sound of a truck moving along the highway somewhere behind the tree line. Then Chloe looked back down at the phone in her hand, and I watched something change in her expression. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, pushing through it quietly and without any drama, was something that looked a lot like relief. Her sister was out there, and she was reaching back. We decided to drive separately, not because we didn't trust each other, but because 2 cars meant 2 exit options if something went wrong. That kind of thinking had become automatic over the past few days. Every decision filtered through the same quiet question. What happens if this goes sideways? It was an exhausting way to move through the world, and I had only been doing it for less than a week. Emma had been living inside that question for months. Chloe pulled out of the arcade parking lot first. I followed at a distance, watching her taillights ahead of me on the dark road until we reached the highway and spread out into separate lanes. We didn't talk on the drive. No calls, no texts. Just two cars moving through the night toward the same destination. The address led us to a stretch of road outside Rockford that looked like it belonged to a different era entirely. Old commercial buildings set back from the road, most of them dark, a few showing the faint evidence of businesses that had tried and quietly failed. And at the end of the stretch, set further back than the others behind a cracked and weed-split parking lot, the building. It had been a bowling alley once. You could still tell from the shape of it, the long, low roof line, the oversized entrance canopy that had lost most of its lettering, the faded ghost of a logo near the top of the exterior wall. The kind of place that had meant something to someone's Friday nights for decades before the economics of it stopped making sense. I parked beside Chloe's car, and we walked to the back of the building without discussing it. The maintenance door was exactly where the message had said. A heavy steel door with peeling gray paint and a handle worn smooth from years of use. Chloe knocked 3 times. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Then the sound of a latch being turned from inside. The door opened. Emma Bennett looked smaller than I remembered. That was the first thing I noticed. She had always carried herself with a kind of quiet confidence that made her seem larger than her actual presence. The girl standing in the doorway of that maintenance room looked like someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had finally reached the point where setting it down felt both necessary and terrifying. She was wearing the same clothes she had probably been wearing for at least 2 days. Her hair was pulled back roughly. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke to days of broken sleep in unfamiliar places. But she was standing. She was alert. And when she saw Chloe, her face did something complicated and immediate that moved through relief and guilt and exhaustion all at once before she could arrange it into anything more controlled. Chloe crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into a hug so tight that Emma actually made a small sound of surprise before hugging back just as hard. I stood in the doorway and gave them the moment. The maintenance room was small and smelled of old grease and concrete. There was a camping lantern on a shelf providing most of the light, a sleeping bag rolled out against the far wall, an empty water bottle, a backpack. Emma had been living out of this room. For how long exactly I couldn't tell, but long enough to have made it feel temporarily like somewhere rather than nowhere. When they finally separated, Chloe held Emma by the shoulders and looked at her the way older sisters look at younger ones when they have been scared out of their minds and are trying not to show how scared they were. "Are you hurt?" Chloe asked. "No," Emma said. "I'm fine. I'm just tired. You've been moving around for almost a week." "I know." Emma glanced past Chloe toward me. "Hi, Ethan." "Hi, Emma," I said. She almost smiled. "I didn't expect you to be the one who found the jacket." "Neither did I said honestly. She nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something she had been quietly thinking about. Then she moved to the backpack against the wall and sat down cross-legged in front of it with the lantern casting a steady pale light across her face. "I'll tell you everything," she said, "because I'm done carrying it by myself." She started at the beginning, which was further back than I had expected. 8 months ago, she had borrowed Chloe's laptop to finish a college assignment when her own computer was being repaired. She had found the files by accident, a folder she clicked on thinking it was something else. What she found inside were the photographs Chloe had secretly taken as her own form of protection. Names, transaction records, event schedules. Enough to understand immediately that her sister had been involved in something far outside the boundaries of normal part-time work. Instead of confronting Chloe directly, she had started researching on her own. She told herself it was because she didn't want to alarm anyone until she knew exactly what she was dealing with. The truth, she admitted quietly, was that she thought she could fix it herself. She thought if she could gather enough evidence of what was really happening, she could find a way to end it cleanly, protect her family, and hand the whole thing to someone who could use it without anyone getting hurt in the process. "I didn't understand how deep it actually went," she said. "Not until I accessed the secondary records through one of the event coordinator's devices. He left his phone unattended during one of the events I attended with a friend. I had about 4 minutes." "For minutes," Chloe said flatly. "I was fast," Emma said it without apology. "What I pulled from that device was completely different from what you had. It wasn't just transactions. It was internal communications. Names of people inside legitimate businesses who were knowingly involved. Amounts that went far beyond what the ledgers showed. And when the accountant noticed the access, I said, He traced it back within a week. I didn't know until one of the event staff called me on a number I didn't recognize and asked me to come in for a meeting. Emma paused. The way he asked made it very clear it wasn't optional. That's when I ran. She had been moving ever since. Motels paid in cash, the lake house rental, a friend's empty apartment, and finally this building, which she had found on a map while looking for somewhere that wasn't connected to anyone she knew. Then came the part none of us had expected. Emma reached into the backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it for a moment before handing it to Chloe. 3 days ago, I was contacted through one of the burner phones, she said. Someone inside the operation reached out to me directly, not to threaten me, to warn me. Chloe unfolded the paper. I read it over her shoulder. A name, a phone number, and a single line of text. The organization is collapsing. I want out. I have everything you need to end this properly. Meet me. Who is this? Chloe asked. Emma looked at us both steadily. He's one of the accountants, she said. He's been watching everything fall apart from the inside for months. 2 of the main organizers have turned against each other completely. Money is missing. People are looking for someone to blame. She paused. He doesn't want the records to surface through the wrong people. He wants a controlled ending. A private investigator, someone connected to the businesses affected, someone who can use the documents to dismantle the financial structure quietly without it becoming something public and uncontrollable. The room was very still. I looked at Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor of an abandoned bowling alley in the middle of the night and understood something clearly for the first time. She hadn't just been hiding. She had been waiting for exactly the right moment to use everything she had gathered. She had been building toward an ending the entire time. We stayed in that maintenance room until almost 2 in the morning. Not because we had nowhere else to go, but because leaving felt premature. There was something about the small contained space, the single lantern, the 3 of us finally in the same room after days of fractured movement, that made none of us want to break it too quickly. We went through everything together. Emma's records, the photographs from the storage unit, the contact note from the accountant inside the operation. We laid it all out in the clearest order we could manage and looked at it like a map of something that had been obscured for too long. The accountant's name was Daniel Rowe. Emma had done enough background research on him to establish that he was not one of the architects of the operation. He was a hired professional who had understood too late exactly what he had been hired into. He had spent the last several months documenting his own parallel record of the financial activity, partly as protection and partly, Emma believed, because he had reached a point where doing nothing felt worse than doing something. He wanted to hand his records and Emma's combined documentation to a private investigator already retained by one of the legitimate businesses that had been used unknowingly as a laundering front. That investigator had been circling the operation for months without enough material to move decisively. With everything Emma and Daniel had accumulated together, the picture would be complete enough to dismantle the financial structure from the inside, without requiring anything public or criminal in the traditional sense. The goal was not prosecution. The goal was collapse. Quiet, thorough, and permanent. And you trust this man? Chloe asked Emma directly. Emma considered it genuinely before answering, which I appreciated. She wasn't running on impulse anymore. I trust that he's scared enough to be honest, she said finally. Scared people who want a clean exit don't create complicated traps. They just want the door open. Chloe looked at me. I nodded slowly. The logic holds. If he wanted to corner Emma, he had easier ways to do it. We agreed on the plan before we left. Emma would contact Daniel Rowe through the burner phone and arrange a meeting point. Neutral ground, public enough to feel safe, private enough to conduct the exchange without drawing attention. The combined documents would be handed to the private investigator through Daniel as the intermediary. Emma would not attend the handoff directly. Chloe and I would. Then we would all go home. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Daniel had suggested a hotel near downtown Chicago, a large mid-range business property on East Wacker, the kind of place with a busy lobby full of conference attendees and traveling professionals where 3 or 4 people having a quiet conversation in a corner would attract absolutely no attention whatsoever. Emma stayed off the grid for one more day at a location she chose herself and didn't share with anyone, including us. That was her condition, and neither Chloe nor I argued with it. She had survived a week alone by being careful. One more day of careful was not unreasonable. Chloe and I drove into the city separately that morning and met in the hotel lobby at noon. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in one of the low armchairs near the lobby windows with a coffee from the hotel cafe. She was wearing a dark coat I hadn't seen before, and her hair was down, which was unusual for her in situations where she was trying to stay composed. She looked up when I crossed the lobby toward her, and for just a second her expression was completely unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in a very long time. Then the composed version returned, and she handed me a coffee. "He's already checked in," she said quietly. "Room 412. He wants to do the exchange upstairs." "I'd rather keep it in the lobby," I said. "So would I." I already told him that. We found a cluster of chairs near the far side of the lobby away from the main desk, partially screened by a large interior plant that the hotel designer had clearly intended as decorative and which was serving today as mild tactical cover. We sat and waited. Daniel Rowe arrived at 12:15. He was younger than I had imagined. Mid-30s, unremarkable in appearance in the way that accountants often are by professional necessity. Medium height, dark jacket, a laptop bag over one shoulder, and a coffee he clearly needed in his other hand. He scanned the lobby when he entered with the particular alertness of someone who had spent recent weeks checking every room they walked into. He found us and crossed the lobby without hesitation. He sat down, set his bag carefully between his feet, and looked at both of us with the measured expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was now discovering that reality never quite matches the rehearsal. "You're Chloe," he said. Then he looked at me. "And you're the one who found the storage unit." "That's right," I said. He nodded once and reached into the laptop bag. What followed should have been straightforward. It was not. The first complication arrived 12 minutes into the exchange. A man I didn't recognize entered the lobby and sat down at the cafe bar with a direct sight line to our seating area. He ordered something without looking at the menu, which meant he wasn't there for the coffee. Daniel noticed him at the same moment I did and went very still. "He's not with me," Daniel said quietly. "Who is he?" Chloe asked. "One of Marcus Hale's people," Daniel said. "Which means Marcus knows about this meeting." The name landed like something cold in the room. Marcus Hale, the coordinator. The name from Emma's notebook. I had not mentioned him to Daniel, and Daniel had not mentioned him to us. The fact that his name had just arrived in the middle of this exchange through a third party meant the situation had more moving pieces than any of us had mapped out. Chloe's hand tightened around her coffee cup. The second complication arrived 3 minutes after the first. The elevator doors across the lobby opened, and 2 men stepped out who were clearly looking for someone. They swept the lobby with the kind of organized efficiency that comes from practice. One of them made eye contact with the man at the cafe bar. A small nod passed between them. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "We need to move the timeline up." Chloe looked at me. I looked at the lobby entrance doors, the elevator bank, the cafe bar, and back to Daniel's laptop bag sitting between his feet. Everything in the room was tightening at once. Then the main entrance doors opened again, and Linda Bennett walked in. I stared at her. Chloe stared at her. Even Daniel, who had no idea who she was, registered the shift in our expressions and turned to look. Linda stood just inside the entrance, scanning the lobby with the particular determination of a woman who had spent 4 days sitting by a phone waiting for someone to bring her news and had finally decided to stop waiting. She was dressed carefully, more carefully than she had been in days. Like she had made a decision before she left home and dressed for it. She found Chloe's face across the lobby, and she walked directly toward us. Chloe stood up. I could see the conflict moving through her immediately. Concern for her mother being here, alarm at the timing, something else underneath both of those things that was harder to name. Linda reached us and stopped. She looked at Chloe for a long moment. Not with anger, not with the fragile grief she had been carrying around the apartment all week. She looked at her daughter with the steady, clear-eyed expression of a woman who had finally finished being protected from the truth and was done pretending she needed to be. "I followed you this morning," she said simply. "I'm sorry, but I'm not leaving." Chloe opened her mouth to respond. Linda held up one hand gently but firmly. "This family has been hiding things from each other for 4 years," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Your father's debts, your work, Emma running. All of it has been handled in separate rooms by separate people, and none of it has made us safer. It has just made us more alone." The lobby noise continued around us. People checking in, the cafe bar humming, the two men near the elevator watching without moving. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Emma stepped out from behind a lobby pillar 10 feet away. She had not stayed away. Of course she hadn't. She looked at her mother, and Linda looked at her, and the distance between them closed in 3 seconds. When they separated, Linda kept one arm around Emma's shoulder and turned back to Daniel Rose sitting with his laptop bag between his feet, looking like a man who had prepared for many scenarios and not quite this one. "Give what you have to whoever can use it," Linda said to him directly. "And let's end this." Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he unzipped the bag and placed a thick sealed envelope on the table between us. "The investigator is already in the building," he said quietly. "He's been waiting upstairs since 11. The investigator's name was Gerald Marsh. He came down from room 412 11 minutes after Daniel sent him a message from the lobby. He was older than I expected, late 50s, with the kind of unhurried manner that comes from decades of working situations where panic is the most expensive thing in the room. He shook hands with Daniel first, then with each of us, and when he was introduced to Linda and Emma, he treated them with the quiet respect of someone who understood immediately what it had cost this family to arrive at this moment. He took the envelope from the table. He looked through its contents briefly, not reading in full, but checking structure, verifying that what Daniel had promised was actually present. Then he looked at Emma directly. "I understand you have a secondary set of records," he said. Emma reached into her jacket and produced a small USB drive. She had been carrying it on her person the entire time. Not in the backpack, not in the storage unit. On her. Gerald took it and held it for a moment. "This is enough," he said. Not enthusiastically, just as a statement of professional fact, which somehow meant more than enthusiasm would have. Across the lobby, the man at the cafe bar stood, left cash on the counter without waiting for change, and walked out through the main entrance. The two men near the elevator exchanged a brief look and followed him out a minute later. Whatever presence Marcus Hale had sent to observe the meeting had seen enough to understand that the situation had moved beyond the point where observation was useful. The documents were no longer in the hands of a frightened 19-year-old moving between motels. They were in the hands of a private investigator retained by people with the financial motivation and professional means to use them properly. The calculation had changed, and everyone in that lobby understood it. Gerald Marsh was gone within 20 minutes of arriving. Daniel Rose sat for a while longer, finishing his coffee, looking like a man who had just set down something he had been carrying uphill for a very long time. He didn't say much after Gerald left. There wasn't much left to say. He had made his decision weeks ago. Today had just been the execution of it. Before he left, he looked at Emma once more. "You did something most adults wouldn't have had the nerve to do," he said quietly. "Just so you know." Emma nodded once. He picked up his bag and walked out through the lobby without looking back. The five of us sat in the arrangement of chairs near the lobby window for a while after that. Linda with her arms still loosely around Emma's shoulders. Chloe beside me, close enough that I was aware of every breath she took. The lobby moved around us with its ordinary afternoon business, completely indifferent to what had just concluded in its midst. Nobody rushed to fill the quiet. Sometimes quiet is the only appropriate response to something finally being over. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of ordinary life, resuming after a long disruption. Gerald Marsh worked efficiently and without any public visibility. The financial investigations he initiated moved through private channels, the kind that affect balance sheets and business structures rather than newspaper headlines. Within 10 days of the hotel exchange, two of the businesses used as laundering fronts had their financial arrangements quietly dismantled by parties who had more than enough documentation to make continued operation impossible. The poker operation itself didn't end with a dramatic moment. It ended the way most things built on bad foundations end. Gradually, then completely. Key people stopped showing up. Money stopped moving. The structure that had held it together dissolved when the internal conflict finally consumed whatever was left of the organization's cohesion. Marcus Hale left Illinois entirely. Nobody I spoke to knew where he went, and I didn't spend time trying to find out. The debts connected to Chloe's father were formally settled through Gerald's investigation when it became clear that the organization collecting them no longer had any operational standing. A letter arrived at Linda's apartment confirming it. Linda read it at the kitchen table and then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer without saying anything for a long moment. Then she made tea and said, "I wish his father had known it would end this way." Nobody responded because there was nothing to add to that. Linda moved out of the Winthrop Avenue apartment 3 weeks after the hotel exchange. It was a practical decision more than an emotional one, she said, though I suspected it was both equally. The apartment had been the family home through years of difficulty and secrets and careful management of things that should have been shared rather than carried alone. Starting somewhere smaller and quieter felt right. She found a place near Oak Park, 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a window in the living room that looked out onto a tree-lined street. Emma helped her move on a Saturday in early November. I drove the larger furniture items in a borrowed van. Chloe directed the placement of boxes with the systematic confidence of someone who needed the organization right then, and we let her have it without comment. By mid-afternoon, the new apartment looked like somewhere someone lived. Linda stood in the middle of the living room with her hands on her hips, surveying the arrangement, and said it was perfect, which I don't think was entirely about the furniture placement. Emma started back at community college the following Monday. She had missed almost a full semester and had some ground to make up, but the college was accommodating once the circumstances were explained in the vague terms available. She sat in her first class back and sent Chloe a single text message afterward. It was fine. The professor is terrible, but I actually missed being bored by someone. Chloe showed me the message and laughed. A real laugh, unguarded and sudden, the kind I hadn't heard from her in months. Chloe and I didn't immediately find our way back to each other. That would have been a neater ending than the truth deserved. The truth was messier and slower and more honest. We talked, more than we had in the last year of our relationship combined, about what she had been carrying and why she had decided to carry it without me, about the moment she had made the calculation that protecting me meant removing me, about whether that had been the right decision or whether it had just been the most available one. She said she didn't know. I said I thought it was both, which made her quiet in the way that meant she was actually thinking about it rather than dismissing it. We walked a lot during those weeks. The city in late autumn has a particular quality to it, the cold coming in gradually, the light changing, everything slowing toward winter without quite arriving there yet. We walked along the lakefront on evenings when neither of us had anywhere specific to be, talking through things that needed to be talked through and occasionally just walking without talking, because that was enough too. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when she finally said it. We were standing on the path beside Lake Michigan, watching the last of the day's light move across the water in long flat ribbons of orange and gray. The wind was coming off the lake with the first real bite of winter in it. Chloe had her hands in her coat pockets and was looking at the water with that expression she had, the one that meant something was working its way toward the surface. "I never stopped," she said. I looked at her. "Loving you," she said simply. "I never stopped. I just convinced myself that stopping was the same as protecting." The water moved in the way it always moves, steadily and without opinion, carrying the light out toward the far gray line of the horizon. "I know," I said. "You knew?" "I think I knew the whole time," I said. "That's probably why it took me 3 weeks to return your clothes." She turned and looked at me with an expression that moved through several things quickly before settling on something that was equal parts exasperation and warmth. Then she laughed again, that same real, unguarded laugh. And standing there beside Lake Michigan in the cold late autumn light, with everything finally honest between us, it occurred to me that I had driven to that apartment on Winthrop Avenue, carrying 2 trash bags full of someone else's clothes, expecting the simplest possible ending. What I had found instead was something that had needed to be found for a very long time. Not just Emma. Not just the truth about the debts and the operation and the years of careful secrets. Something simpler and harder than all of that. A family that had stopped hiding things from itself. And a woman standing beside a lake, finally saying out loud what she should never have had to hide in the first place.